guys. Welcome to the True Podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing one of my good friends. He's been a longtime family friend of my wife's and my brother-in-law. This is Mr. Blake Calderera. Welcome.
Hey there, Caleb.
How you doing?
Doing pretty good.
Yeah. How was your Christmas? It's
Christmas
good?
was great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Spent it with my family. Newly moved to Little Rock, a place where most of my family lives, and
Yeah.
my brother and his wife just came in town to
Yeah.
Longview.
Are they in Little Rock or
They're in Kentucky right now.
Kentucky? That's right.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
How are they doing? Good?
Yeah, they're doing
Yeah.
great.
Awesome, man. Well, listen, thank you for being on the show. I know your time is valuable because you're not in town a lot. And so I'm kind of pulling you away from your family a little bit. So I appreciate that.
Dude,
Um,
I love stuff like this. I love talking
Yeah.
about ideas, and you're a good friend, and I always appreciate the conversations that we have. So
Yeah.
this is a pleasure for me as well. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to kind of, not to dive in too quickly, but I came up with like a list of questions that I had for you because you're just, in my opinion, you're one of the more interesting, intricate people that I think I've ever met in my life. I mean, like some of the things that you've done or the stories that I've heard because we haven't known each other very long, probably I don't know 3-4 years, maybe longer. I mean, I've
A little
probably
bit longer.
yeah, maybe 6 years, around 6 years. But I'm the same way. I've enjoyed every conversation I've ever had with you. So a couple of things that I wanted to talk about is your time in the Peace Corps and the time that you spent in Africa. So just kind of break that down. Like, what inspired you to do that? Was that like a career choice? You wanted to have it on your resume, or was this something that you're just passionate about?
Yeah, sure. I'm flattered by the description, by the way. I mean, when it came to the Peace Corps, that was, I don't know. I feel like, people have an idea of what the Peace Corps might be. Essentially you're going to serve in another country for a couple years. It's with the United States government. I went to the country of Zambia in sub-Saharan Africa. But gosh, I mean, it's easy to like think about it in such a romantic way, but what drew me there sure was like a sense of adventure, but it was also kind of like a quarter life crisis of like, who am I? And like, I need to figure things out. I need to find my way in the world. And I feel like I had to prove things to myself. And I was like, well, as a, 24, 25-year-old, like, what can I do? Like, what am I qualified for? And what would seem valuable and what relates to travel. And, the Peace Corps came up. I had heard a professor talk about it when I was at university, and it just seemed like an amazing thing to do. So I actually applied for the first time when I was like 23, I think, and I got rejected the first time around.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I was already on a shorter list because
Yeah.
one of the hardest barriers to get past is just like your medical history and medical approvals. And I was taking a prescription drug at the time that was illegal in like half the Peace Corps countries.
Oh, geez.
So I immediately was on a shorter list of countries, and then I just didn't make it through whatever process they use to judge people. But I ended up applying again and getting it the second time.
Yeah. So your time. So you apply. They tell you no. You apply again. They're like, okay, let's do this. In your mind, what was did you have like a goal? Like, I want to help them in this specific way, or was it more they kind of told you what your task was
Yeah.
or what to do?
Yeah, so the Peace Corps, like, it has certain goals. Two of the big goals are forging like partnerships and relationships between Americans and other cultures, people in other countries. But one of the big things is technical assistance, because you're going to countries in the third world, in the global south, as some people call it. You're going to countries where usually there's a huge economic disparity.
Yeah.
So in Zambia specifically, there's four different sectors. There's education, health, there's life sciences, which is kind of like agriculture, and I was in the aquaculture sector. So I was a fish farming agent where I would basically act as a consultant and a teacher. I was trained by both the Peace Corps and the Department of Fisheries in Zambia to teach farmers who are already very savvy, very agriculturally minded, but to teach them about a different practice that could increase income and protein sources for their families, or if they could scale their operation, to have some economic benefit in the area. Um, but it's really difficult to go in and like see success in your primary project. So I
Yeah.
didn't see a lot of like success in terms of like this is what I created in terms of my primary aquaculture focused project when I was in Zambia. And
Yeah.
that's, at least in the country of Zambia, I would say that's kind of the status quo.
Yeah.
um, so you kind of have to be very open, adaptable, and willing to try all kinds of different initiatives and things just to see like where are their needs in the community and where do people actually want to work with you. You know, it's a very
So
nuanced thing.
so the economic side of it was like, hey, I'm going to help you figure out how to harvest or like build these ponds, bring
Hmm.
in, fish, and not only so I from what I understand, there's like 3 months of famine in Africa. Is that right? Or
um I wouldn't call it, actually, I don't know if I would call it famine exactly. We would call it a hunger period
yeah.
where it was like understood that there was a window each year where there was just less food available right before like the big harvest that
Hmm.
was predictable. Um, so yeah, there was a hunger period, and yeah, if you can diversify the things that you're growing and the things that you're producing, you can help hedge against that.
Yeah.
Um, I think the biggest challenge, though, with a project like aquaculture is, I would go to certain farmers, savvy farmers, expert farmers that work in a rural context, they know how to grow the things that they've grown for generations. But when you try and introduce farming fish, they look at you like, are you kidding me? Like, farming, nobody farms fish. Like,
Yeah.
why would we try that? And then, I mean, even think about it in like America. If like some young buck came to you, and a lot of the farmers I was talking to were like 40, 50, sometimes 60, still working in the fields. So imagine like me, like a 25, 26 year old coming to a 50, 60-year old American farmer and just saying, hey, the way that you've been doing things for a while that you really understand and know, let's do it differently. Let's try this new thing.
Yeah.
I feel like it's human nature to be skeptical.
I mean, I've even
Yeah.
experienced that on a smaller scale. When I was a chief integrity inspector for Spectre Energy, I was 23,
Yeah.
24, and I'm telling, a guy that's been doing it for 50 years, like, hey, we're gonna try something different here, and he's like, no, we're not. And
Hmm.
so marrying like the young generation and the old generation, I think, is always a challenge.
Yeah.
And especially being in a foreign country, I can't imagine the other red tape that you had to go through. I think someone said to me that you had to meet the tribe leader,
Yeah.
if I'm saying that right, and present a gift. How did
Oh
that
yeah.
go?
This is actually a great story.
Yeah.
Like, if you want me to tell it,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, I want to hear.
so
Yeah.
there are big formalities in Zambia when it comes to cultural leadership. They kind of have two forms of governance alongside one another. They don't necessarily clash. They kind of work together in a way. But I was living in a small rural village in Zambia, and so there were like 50 families in my area, and a slightly larger area that probably comprised a few thousand people. There was a leader in the area called the Induna, or the sub chief.
Okay.
So for that area, he was a chief. He was a powerful person, but he was very much a public servant. He was constantly doing things for people in the community, and he technically, because of his cultural significance, owned all the land in the area that I lived in.
Okay.
And it was his responsibility to disperse that land to.
Like, how much land are we talking about?
I couldn't even tell you. Like,
Yeah.
I would say it's hundreds of acres, if
Yeah.
not thousands.
Okay.
So it's quite a big
Yeah.
deal. It's multiple different villages.
So it's somewhat of a burden to have to patch that up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not like, don't imagine this as like a chief who just kind of like sits back and like just calls the shots. No, this guy's active in his community.
Yeah.
He's very knowledgeable. He grows his own crops and things like that. But he's also the first person that you have to meet if you yourself want to be a public servant, a Peace Corps volunteer in his area. And all the people in my community were like, oh, we're going to set up a meeting with the Induna.
Okay.
So we go to see him for the first time, and my counterpart, kind of the guy that I was working with in the village at the time, he kind of walked me through the process, and he was like, okay, first of all, a few days in advance, he was like, you need to bring gifts. Most people bring money, just straight up cash, because the idea is that he's going to reinvest that in the community.
Yeah.
Some people bring chickens. And I got the idea. I had a bottle of wine with me that I had bought from the grocery store. And I was like, this would be nice if I gave him that. So I ended up putting aside a little cash and a bottle of wine. And so my counterpart was going to hand him the wine, but I was going to bring him the money. But the way that you approach the Induna the first time you're meeting him, you go to his house, which was in the neighboring village, and then you walk up to him. And as he comes out of his house, there's kind of like I guess I can show you. There's a greeting that you do in Kikaonde, which is the language of the cultural group that we were with. So the village and the entire surrounding area is a chiefdom. And in Zambia, there's like 73, I think that's the number, 73 different tribal groups, basically kind of like different ethnic groups, different languages for each group. Probably the fifth or sixth largest one is the Kaonde people. And so this chief and all the people in the area were Kaondes. And it's very typical for Kaondes when they meet or see each other on the road, you just kind of clap your hands and you kind of bow your head. It's kind of formal. You bend your knees a little bit, and you'll say things like "Mutende mwane," and the other person will be like "mwane," and they'll pat their heart. It's really sweet,
Yeah.
and it's such a nice practice. But when you meet the Induna, you take it a step further, and you physically get down on your knees, and you continue to clap while he's walking up to you. And so you're clapping the whole time. I can't remember if we said anything. We might have been saying like "moine," but we're just being coached through it. And then as he approaches, you actually bow all the way physically to the ground.
Oh, wow.
And he's not wearing any traditional clothes or anything. I have seen him wear such things, but this is just a normal everyday meeting.
Yeah.
He's coming out. So I'm bowing to the ground, and then my counterpart, motions to me, and then I get out the money in an envelope. I present it in front of me. He hands me the bottle of wine. I put it in front of me on the ground. So this is like sandy ground right by his house.
And you're still face down?
And I'm still facing down. Yeah. My other Peace Corps friend is there with me. We're both bowed to the ground, clapping. And then he comes up and he tells us to rise. And then we just start chatting, in English, because he was multilingual. Most Zambians speak 3 to 5 languages.
Oh,
So,
really?
oh yeah,
Oh, man.
because Zambians speak English because it was a former British territory, and um, a lot of Zambians do, not all. But there's so many different tribal languages that are within the Bantu family. A lot of people pick up multiple different languages.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. So as you're kind of going through this what was the conversation like after, like you presenting with this and he
hmm
just kind of welcomed you in and
Yeah. Just well,
just
yeah, very welcoming. Just he was asking kind of what our goals were with the Peace Corps, what we hope to accomplish, and I wanted to communicate to him, look, it's you and your community, what you want and what you value. We want to take that to heart and just work together. And it was just the beginning of a friendship.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, there's another story that I want you to tell, and this is I didn't know about that one, so thank you for
Yeah.
sharing that. But I did hear, and only because uh, your mom told everyone because she was kind of rattled by it, but you got sick,
hmm
um, and in order to get the proper care you needed, explain how you had to go and get that.
Okay. Well, I mean,
First, what
yeah.
happened? Like, how did you get sick? And then, like, what was, like, how did you have to
Yeah.
get care?
So, a running joke in the Peace Corps is like, especially when former Peace Corps volunteers get together, is just talking about sicknesses and the things
Yeah.
that you have to go through, constant gastro problems and some serious sicknesses. So like when you ask that, I don't know where to begin because I got sick so many different times.
Well, I'm specifically talking about where you had to, I think they said you had like an hour bike ride.
Yeah.
It was like, can't remember what, if it was like mono or if it was,
Yeah.
I don't know what,
Well, I did get malaria. That's
malaria.
probably
I
what
think that's
what's being
probably what it was.
referenced.
Yeah.
So, um, malaria is caused by a parasite in your blood that is transmitted by mosquitoes, and it's a very common disease in much of sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah.
It's been eradicated from the U.S. and it used to be
Yeah.
present in swampy parts of the U.S., but it's still very prevalent in Africa, and it's a life-threatening disease. But if you get it treated, um, it's very treatable
Yeah.
because you just have to notice when you have it. Like we had little test kits where you prick your finger, you test your blood, and then if you know you have it, you start taking the pills that will kill the parasite. But I mean, it's imagine like the worst flu you could
Yeah.
you could possibly think of. Like I had luckily, so I was in a village that was 40 kilometers away from my bus transport. And once I got to that town, the Boma is what we called it, then I could take a 2 hour bus um, to the provincial capital where we had resources, where we had a hospital. All of our health care was provided for by the U.S. government through the Peace Corps. So the Peace Corps covered all of our healthcare expenses, but you're still in Zambia, a country with like less resources to deal with things. But there was a mine in the provincial capital, so they had a decent hospital there. Um, but let's see. So I had just so happened to travel into town to the provincial capital before I realized I had malaria, before I took the blood test. Thank God. Because, I had traveled to the provincial capital. I was staying at our Peace Corps house. You could stay there a couple days a month and just do work or relax. And I had a splitting head. Well, it wasn't quite splitting. I had a headache that hadn't gone away for over 12 hours. So I tested myself. And then, oh gosh, I realized I had malaria, immediately took the cure. But I was like, I'm going to get sick. It's only a matter of time. So I better start preparing. So
Yeah.
I immediately it was the right time of day that I knew my parents would be waking up, and I had data. So I called them through WhatsApp, and I remember just saying, "Hey, mom and dad, how's it going?" And they're like, "Oh, we're glad you called, Blake." And I'm like, "Do you hear my voice? Do you hear how good I sound?" And they're like, "Yeah, okay, yeah, you sound fine." I'm like, "Good. Just know that I'm healthy and I'm fine, but I have malaria and I'm about to get real sick. I just wanted you to know that I'm like where I need to be, and I've taken the cure, but it might be rough for a couple days." And it was rough. Um, my fever got very high. It almost hit 105.
Phew.
I had the worst chills of my life. And this was 6 hours after that conversation that I started to
Oh
get
my
sick.
goodness.
But that mild hallucinations, I wouldn't even call it that. It was just like tingling and bright spots in my vision.
Yeah.
The weakest I've probably ever felt, one of the weakest. Um, but the Peace Corps was great. I mean, they did tell me to take cold showers to get my temperature down, and that was like torture.
Oh, I bet.
That was
Yeah.
torture. I remember just one of my friends was helping me, and I was like, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't take another cold shower. But the Peace Corps hooked me up. They actually flew me to the Capitol, and I
Yeah.
got decent medical treatment. So,
Man,
yeah.
I can't imagine. Because listen, I'm tough in a lot of things, but when I get sick, and you can ask my wife, I turn into the biggest baby in the world. It's like
I
it's
identify with that.
so
Yeah.
crazy. Like I feel like I can do a lot of things. Like I'm physically strong, I'm a big guy. Man, I get the flu, I'm worthless. So I can't imagine. Cause did you have to do like a bike ride to get like while you were sick? Or was that another
I
incident?
I did have to bike.
It's like an hour, right?
Yeah, it was like an hour and 15 minutes. I didn't notice that I had it. The symptoms weren't horrible at that point, but I
Okay.
did have it cuz basically when the mosquito bites you, the parasite goes to your liver and it
Mhm.
waits like a week.
Oh,
This
jeez.
specific this specific type, if anybody's interested, you can look up Plasmodium falciparum. That's the Latin name. They like
There
teach
you
you
go.
all about malaria. And if anybody's wondering, like they did give us chemoprophylactic pills, but I wasn't
But
taking my
didn't take
pills,
them.
and I almost got kicked out of the Peace Corps for that because I stupidly admitted to that fact.
Yeah.
Um, and I started taking them after the fact. But if you take the pills, it'll keep the parasite from making it to your liver. It'll kill it off. But once it comes out of your liver, it kind of comes out slowly, and then it starts to affect your blood cells. So it had just started when I was on the bike
Okay.
ride. So it wasn't that big of a deal at that point.
Yeah.
But then that night, I was very, very sick.
Yeah. What do you think your most like if you look back on your time in Africa, like the most impactful thing that you feel like you provided or walked away from with that experience?
See, these questions are hard to answer. These questions are hard. I mean, I think I'll answer it in two ways. One, I won't go into detail on, but definitely the relationships with Zambians, with my host family, people that I love dearly, and with other Americans that were in the Peace Corps, people that I still love dearly to this day, keep in touch with. Um, that was hands down just breaking cultural barriers and cultural barriers with people who came from different states in the U.S., different backgrounds, and
Yeah.
and Zambians. That was the biggest. But another thing about Zambia that I will never forget is just, especially in the village, it's you lose your sense of hurry, your sense of time. You're more slow, more intentional, and your day is defined by somewhat what you need to do, but it more it unfolds more naturally and organically. And if you see a person in the village that you haven't seen in a while, your plans change because you don't know when you'll see them again.
Hmm.
And so you might just take a 2 hour detour so you can talk to two or three different people. Um, and so everything is constantly changing. There's less structure, but it's very open, slow, and you're very in tune with your surroundings.
Did
You know?
because like in America, I think we all walk in a low level of anxiety all the time.
Hmm.
I think we're being fed, you know, the information we get from the news and just social media or whatever. I think everyone kind of has this stigma of just always being a little anxious. Did you feel that as you disconnected from kind of America going to Africa? Did you have any like high levels of anxiety, or was it a more peaceful state of mind?
Well, there's a big caveat. Um, First of all, I was in Zambia as a privileged American who had the U.S. government paying, you know, essentially like a very small salary, but
Hmm.
for living in Zambia, like big social safety net. So it's like
Yeah.
I was living without electricity, without running water, but I still had resources to lean on. So that's important. That
Yeah.
takes away some of the anxiety. I don't know what it's like to be a real Zambian in a rural village. So that's
Hmm.
important. But I would say the biggest difference between American life and Zambian life, with that in mind, there's a lot of low grade, slow burning anxiety in America that will ramp up, but is just kind of constantly there. In Zambia, I feel like it was a roller coaster as a Peace Corps volunteer. The default state in the village was very peaceful, um, especially because you're not hurrying. Your sense of time is different. You kind of work with where you're at, where the community is at. Um, but some situations could become incredibly stressful when you get malaria or when you can't find transport for 4 or 5 hours after dark, or maybe someone in the village got sick and you don't know how to help them, or a lot of
Mm.
people, there's less veterinary services for dogs, and a lot of volunteers had dogs. So I think the acute stresses, even for a Peace Corps volunteer, would be greater, but there's not like this slow anxiety that's always there under the
Yeah.
surface. There's a lighter
But I
existence.
almost feel like the high and low is almost like how we were meant to be. Like I don't think that we're designed to live in that slow burning anxiety where there's something constantly being put in front of us. Because like when I think back to, even a biblical era, or however far back you want to go, you know, when when we were operating as humans, like for example, food, we have to go on a hunt. And I think that the hunt would bring anxiety because maybe you haven't eaten in 5 days. And then once you get your meal, then the anxiety goes away.
Yeah.
Maybe you get a release of dopamine and then
Yep.
you kind of calm back down, like you've accomplished the task. As to where now it's like, I mean, food in America, my goodness, we can leave here and have food in our system in 3 or 4 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are places everywhere. So when I think about, being in a position where all of those amenities are gone, it almost brings like a different level of appreciation for like the farmers. Like
Yeah.
they know exactly like, okay, there's a time to sow and there's a time to reap. They understand that fully. Like we got to work and then, and I don't know like the seasons out there. I know we briefly touched on that, but I mean, it just seems to me like the not necessarily the peace that they may have a different level of like understanding. Yeah, I guess would be. I mean, because like,
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, my background as a child is rough, but I always tell people like, it's a breeze compared to what some of these foreign countries go through. I've got a friend who's done a couple of, he used to live in Haiti, and he's told me some stories about that. And my gosh, I'm like, I don't even know why you went out there. Like some of the things that they practice, like witchcraft is very,
Yeah.
like he said he was driving down the road and the guide that he was with, there's like a mob coming. They were protesting
Oh
something,
gosh.
and he knew the guy leading it. Like he recognized him. He was like, "You need to turn around right now."
Really?
Like so that
Yeah.
that roller coaster of anxiety. Maybe everything was good, and then it was like, "Oh no." Like we've got to get out of here right
Right.
now. So I could see where where you could have those waves. What so one of the questions I have on here, and this may be another difficult one to answer, but your time there, and then we'll move on after this. But did your time in Africa influence your perspective on, like a more like global issues? Did it change the way you look at how the world functions uh, differently? It's I would assume that you being there and then coming back here, did you experience
Yeah.
like a culture shock or
I did. Yeah. It sometimes it's hard to put it into words, but I do think from a global perspective, one of the most persistent things that I came away with is just we don't really know what people in a vastly different cultural context, we don't know what they need.
yeah,
Um, I think you should be, I mean, this is my opinion, I certainly don't have all the answers. I was in Zambia for 2 years,
yeah,
which is not a lot of time. So I just have, things that I came away with, but um, I think if you start to think that, oh, if people would just do this, or if it would be that, no, it's way more complicated than that. And working and living alongside Zambians in the village, what I realized was you have to work with people where they're at in the context that makes sense to them. And that's where the solutions lie, where, you know, people have to create change if change needs to be created. And you can't kind of like prescribe it from outside of a situation. You can't just interface with somebody and know what they need. You've got to like be at their level and
yeah,
to really understand such a vastly different context. And I think that's personally what the Peace Corps does so well is it's like we're going to help you live as close to the means of the people as we can while still keeping you safe,
yeah,
so from a global context, it's like the idea of trying to solve really complicated problems with like blanket laws or initiatives. I don't think we shouldn't do that. I'm just a little skeptical until you get into really nuanced cultural conversations.
yeah. Well, um, well, guys, that's his time in Africa, and I'm sure we could talk about this for
Yeah.
long time. We may do a part two on that. It's just so interesting. Um, so moving on, I wanted to talk to you just because, we've got close friends and family members that have brought some of this to my attention. But you do a lot of solo hiking, where you'll just like go and just hike by yourself and
Yeah.
you'll just take off. So one of the hikes that you did was the Grand Enchanted Trail, right?
Grand Enchantment Trail.
Enchantment Trail. So from what I've seen on that, it's like 770-ish miles long. It kind of like
That's how long the whole trail
the
is.
whole trail. Did
I
you?
did just under 700 miles.
Okay, so almost.
So I
Yeah,
skipped a section for time, and I was tired. I didn't want to go up one of the big peaks, so I
yeah.
had a short detour.
Okay. So on that, like what, how did you come up with like, hey, I'm gonna go, I'm gonna take off and I'm gonna go do this. And I'm gonna do it by because most people would like take a friend
Yeah,
or something. And you're like, nah, I'm just going to take off and go do this.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the same energy that brought me to the Peace Corps, just trying to figure out life. And I think I was really drawn to, yeah, yeah, just drawn to headspace. I really wanted something to allow me to just think about my life and kind of, at that age, I think I was 25 at the time. Um, my biggest thing was I thought I could somehow figure out my life, figure out like what my calling was, figure out what I needed to do.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, like, you figure it out by doing things. But this was the first time in my life where it was like, oh, I'm going to like do something. I'm going to test myself because I don't know exactly what to do and I'm feeling conflicted inside. I'm just going to jump into something.
Yeah.
And I had seen it probably sounds funny, but I saw the movie Wild.
Oh,
It
yeah.
was an adaptation from a book, and I was like, I can't believe this is a thing that people do. Like they just go on long hikes. And this was like probably a year before, and I was like, I'm definitely like keeping that in the back of my mind. When the opportunity presents itself, I'm doing that. That
Yeah.
seems awesome. And so I had like a 2-month span before I was starting a seasonal position, where I was like, oh, I have some time where I could do something cool while I'm young. I have a little bit of money saved up and like I could do one of these hikes. And so I literally just Googled. I wanted to do an entire hike, but I didn't have enough time and I certainly didn't have experience where I wanted to do anything over 1,000 miles. So I was like, if I can find something in the 600 to 800 mile mark, I literally just Googled through hikes. And then I was like, whoa, this one's in Arizona and New Mexico. This looks cool. And so I just started looking on the internet and I found a website and the guy who put this trail together, it's just a compilation of pre-existing trails. And uh, if you're interested, you can go to simplicity.net, and that's the Grand Enchantment Trail website. This guy just put it together in 2003, mapped it out on GPS, made it to where you could download all the maps, download where water sources are. So I'm like a super inexperienced
That
backpacker.
definitely helps.
Yeah, but I had like all these resources and I was like, "Oh, this might be possible."
Yeah.
And so I was like, "Man, I need something in my life. I feel lost and I need to figure things out. If I go solo, this will be a chance where I can like discover kind of who I am, you
Yeah.
know?"
So what was your biggest challenge on that particular hike? Because you've done more than one of these.
Now I have.
Yeah,
At
now you
this
have.
point in my life, I mean, at that time
Yeah, you hadn't done any.
I think I had gone overnight like once
Oh
beforehand.
man.
I was so like,
So you're pretty green.
oh yeah,
Yeah.
like I was very inexperienced and I got lucky because of people that helped me along the way. Really kind people, a little bit of luck. What I attribute to God, His influence in my life. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what helped me get through it. I'm sorry. What
Did
did you
you
ask?
like your biggest challenge? Did you encounter anything that kind of just like you were like, oh wait a minute, I have no idea how to handle this.
Um, I mean, when you're in that situation, it doesn't matter if you don't know how to handle it because when you're in the wilderness and you've only got one way, and that's forward.
Yeah.
You can't give up. I mean, you can stop hiking, and sometimes that is the right decision, but you have to figure out a problem. Like
Yeah.
what you pack stays with you. Any shortcuts you take manifest themselves down the road. And I think overall, my inexperience was a huge issue because I had to pack usually about a week's worth, anywhere from 3 days to a week's worth of food at any given time. And I had to be very particular about how reliable my water sources were on my map. But I was very good about finding water since I did have the detailed maps and I carried probably more than most people would like. 'Cause
Yeah.
water's heavy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It's I think 8 pounds a gallon approximately. But the food, one of the biggest challenges was there were multiple times where I had underpacked food and I had to ration what I was eating in
Yeah.
order to, you
What
know,
did you pack for food?
um, all kinds of different stuff. Lots of nuts, cranberries, raisins, almonds, tins of sardines. Probably not the most weight efficient,
Yeah.
but full of calories. I
See,
had
because
some,
I would be
yeah,
thinking like milk duds, like because it's a insulin spike, high
yeah,
calorie, high kind of, you could eat 3 or 4 of them. You
oh yeah,
probably got 120, 150 calories,
yep.
you know?
Nowadays, I really love candy bars because you're burning those
Yeah.
calories and
Oh, yeah.
and they're packed full of them. But back then, I did a couple Cliff Bars, well, a lot of Cliff Bars. Tortillas, one of my
Oh,
favorite
yeah, yeah.
things. Good, authentic
That's
tortillas
smart.
from
Yeah.
New Mexico, and then I'd bring things like Nutella and peanut butter.
Oh,
Those are
yeah.
staples,
Mm.
full of calories. I even brought olive oil with me, but I was really figuring out the food situation. Like I brought rice and maybe if it's instant rice, but like
Sure.
you gotta understand how long it's gonna take to cook these things and how much fuel you have in your little camp stove. So I
Yeah.
made a lot of mistakes food wise, but
Yeah. What
um,
did you have a stint there where you just didn't eat?
um so I had one stretch where I went through the Gila National Forest. Um, that was that was a tough stretch because I had to go 7 days to get to a post office that I had mailed myself food
Okay.
to, and then 7 more days to get to the next location. So that's 14 days where the only place that I could stop at is get food from that post office. Like I couldn't buy any more from like a grocery or anything like that. I was
Yeah.
getting my water on the trail, and the problem was when I was about to get to my halfway point, get to that post office, I got up real early on Saturday morning because I had to get to the post office that was like 12 miles away. So I wasn't going to be able to walk that far on this road in New Mexico. It's called Burma Road.
Hmm.
Windy, hilly road. Like, there's no way I was going to walk the whole 12 miles and get there before 12 p.m. when I knew the post office closed. And I had not planned that well. And I was like, crap, if I don't get there before 12, I'll have to wait 2 extra days to get my food at this post office
Oh,
before
jeez.
hiking 7 more because there was no more food because I was in the middle of the wilderness. That was my only source of food. I would have had to, I don't know, either just fast or kind of beg the few little houses that I saw in that one town. But thank God, I got to Burma Road at 7 a.m. and I'm like, surely I'll see a car on this road and I'll hitch. I'll hitch on the road. But I mean, this is a dirt road in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico. But thank God it was hunting season.
Oh,
Hunting
wow.
season for elk had just started. So I walked for, I think it was almost 11 a.m. And I had only seen 2 cars going in the opposite direction, not going towards the town of, gosh, I might be saying it wrong. I think it was Monticello. But point is, at like 11:20, yeah, 11:15 or so, like I'm starting to say a rosary. And and like I have a Catholic upbringing, but
Yeah.
for some reason the rosary's not really my thing, but
Yeah.
someone had given it to me. I hate that I don't remember exactly who. It may have been my
I was
mother.
gonna say if I had to
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah. But point is, I had a rosary and I was using that
Yeah.
thing. I was praying. I was like, God, please. I really don't want to go hungry for multiple days. I wasn't
Yeah.
thinking I was going to die, but it was
Sure.
going to be
Oh,
uncomfortable
yeah.
because I already knew with the food that I had, I'd already be rationing it. Because, you start to figure out where you went wrong when you're already in the thick of it.
Sure.
So, but sure enough, like a little past, I'd probably been saying the rosary for 15 minutes or so, and a truck slowly comes around the corner, and I stand in the middle of the road. There's no chance that they're
Yeah.
driving by without stopping. And then I explained my situation, and I'm like, we got to get to the post office fast. If you would be so kind as to take me there. And I was like, I'm dirty. I've been hiking. I haven't bathed in a while, but like, just I'll hop in the back of their pickup truck
Yeah.
and we'll go. And this was a 4-wheel drive road. And these guys, bless their soul, these two hunters, they drove like 40 miles an hour on 4-wheel drive roads, and we probably had 8 miles to go.
Wow.
And they just booked it. And so I'm just like popping up and down, like every time they hit a rock. Like, I mean, the truck was fine. It was a heavy duty truck, but I'm just like having a hell of a time back there. And sure enough, we made it to Monticello, made it to the post office with 4 minutes to spare.
Oh my goodness.
And so I get in, they're about to close, and I'm like, do you have a package for Blake? And they're like, yeah, we do. And then got the package, laid out all my food on just a park bench in the town. And then I took a picture of all my food next to my backpack and my GPS, which had the time. And it was 12:04, and I was just like, oh my God, I just dodged well, thank you, God. I just dodged a bullet.
Well, I would say that would probably be one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah.
So someone told me, it may have been Spencer. So, so so what I was saying, I think somebody told me about a story of you on a hike. Now you've done an abroad hike, right? Have you done anything abroad?
I hiked in Switzerland. Yeah.
So kind of briefly, like what was that experience compared to?
Oh man,
is it
so different?
So
different. There's infrastructure in Switzerland. Like it's so hiking friendly that you can be in a very remote area and in like 3-4 hours you can be in a village that has everything you need. Whereas in Arizona and New Mexico, the spots
pretty bare.
One thing that's different about the Grand Enchantment Trail than definitely Switzerland, but even something like the Appalachian Trail, something in the U.S. that's more well known, there's a lot of people that hike those trails, but like in Arizona and New Mexico, there are parts that are super remote where you just do not see other people.
Yeah.
Like the Gila, when you get back into the Gila, there's nobody around for days.
I remember being in Arizona for a company I used to work for, JW Pipeline. We were doing some kind of survey, and we had to drive kind of back. And I remember being back there thinking, if I die, I don't know if they would find me. Like that's kind of how it was like looking at the ocean, but just desert. Yeah. It was just like there's nothing for as far as you can see. So I mean, and obviously I had gear and I had everything I needed, but you remove all that from me, it could be terrifying.
Was there any plant life at all?
Man, it was, there was some, but it was more like, it reminded me of like Scottsbluff, Nebraska, where they had like, like the rocky kind of plateaus. And so you saw some of that landscape. But in the distance, you saw it. You didn't see anything, like you weren't on it. Like if someone told me like, okay, you got to walk, I would be thinking like, okay, that could be 2 days. Like I don't know, like, and I definitely don't know how to get there.
Yeah,
because you're not walking a straight line, So, I could see where being in that remote. Where you're just not seeing much, man. You're just kind of out there. In Switzerland, from what I understand, it's kind of what you're mirroring is the same conversation I've had with other people. They're like, yeah, it's, like girls go on this hike and, they take a group of girls and they do like, I'm like, okay, well, like, but I've never researched it, but I mean, you've done it. So what was your experience like?
In Switzerland?
Yeah.
So I was on the Via Alpina. That's the
Okay.
name of the hike. It goes all the way across the country of Switzerland. I did not do the whole thing. I intended to do half of it
How
with the
far is that one?
so it's over 300 kilometers.
Okay.
So I did 100 miles.
Yeah.
I did about half of it, little over half of it. Um, and I went from it, my French is terrible, but I went from the French Swiss town of Montreux on it's kind of like if you know where Lake Geneva is, and you just kind of hike out until you get to. I went all the way to Grindelwald, I believe
Okay.
is what it's called. So if you've ever seen Lauterbrunnen, it's a real famous spot on Instagram, or
Yeah.
some people might know Grindelwald. I think
That one
there's two.
sounds more familiar to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if you look it up, like it's got to be some of the most like on planet Earth. I
Yeah.
can't think of many more mountainous landscapes that are beautiful, and
Yeah.
the country is just full of things like that. I mean, there are beautiful spots all over the globe, but Switzerland is just it is an absolute gem.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
I've never been. I know my wife's been to Norway, but she talks about how beautiful that place is.
Oh
And
yeah,
then everyone that I've ever talked to that's been to Ireland says like it's so pretty and the
yeah,
people are so amazing. That's like my bucket list. I've always wanted to go to Ireland
yeah.
and
I've
just check
I've
that out.
I've heard about the what is it, the fjords
Yeah,
in Norway. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. I
I mean,
think Mallory's been there. Yeah,
really.
yeah. I think she's seen some of that stuff. So your experience like walking this now, when you think about your 700-mile desert hike
Yeah.
versus kind of this 100-mile Switzerland. So talk about or talk about it. I just have a question as far as like temperature wise and vegetation and resources, water. Like let's say you didn't have the food that you wanted in Switzerland. Is it more accessible there? I'm
Hmm.
assuming versus like, walking through Arizona.
Yeah. Um, yeah, food is definitely more accessible in Switzerland. Like
Yeah.
I had people offer for me to sit with them and eat fondue, and I
Okay.
hate myself for just being like, no, I got to keep hiking. And I
Yeah.
like thought back and I'm like, I'm an idiot
Yeah, you should
for
just do
not just
yeah.
chilling with them. They're
Yeah.
just in a farmhouse. But yeah, you could stock up on cheese and
Yeah.
little sausages and stuff in the villages. Arizona, you're pretty much there's some stretches it's just all packed,
Yeah.
but it was actually really really cool.
I know,
You
man.
just
It's
learn
just
on the fly.
yeah, you kind of like, all right. I expect some of this stuff to happen, but it's all good. Um so first let's talk about I kind of go back and I'll edit some of this stuff out, but I think we were talking about like the difference in the two hikes, but
Hmm.
specifically you were able to like, the food resources were better, but it was cold,
Hmm.
right? So did you were you prepared for that or
Yeah, so it was actually a lot colder in New Mexico than anywhere because I went to Switzerland in the summer,
Hmm,
so it wasn't too bad cold wise. But New Mexico, I was pretty unprepared. Because it got down in the 20s a couple nights, so I really froze. And especially when I was rationing food,
yeah,
I couldn't generate, with a down sleeping bag, you're generating body heat and it's warming the inside of the bag. Um, and because I was not eating as much when I was at the tail end of my Gila um,
yeah,
stretch, that was also when it was the coldest. So those are some rough nights. Like waking up multiple times throughout the night because you're so cold.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
I had one experience. I was in I was either in Casper or I was in Montana. I was in Wyoming or Montana. I can't remember which one it was, but I had a small camper. I just started, kind of traveling and inspecting, and it was cold. It was January, middle of January. I think there was probably like 4 foot of snow on the ground. We were all
Ooh.
snowed in.
Yeah.
Well, I ran out of propane in the middle of the night. And so I woke up and I just got Maverick,
Mm.
which is my Great Dane. And he's like shaking. He's probably, this poor guy, he's probably like 12 weeks old.
Oh
And I
gosh.
remember breathing out in my camper and I could see my breath. And I
Yeah.
was like, oh no,
Yeah.
I'm out of propane.
Yeah.
And so it's, midnight. There's nothing I can do. So I had this, I remember I had this sleeping bag that was supposed to be good down to, this like, I don't know. I think they said like 20 below is supposed to like work. I'm like, all right,
Supposed
supposed to.
to.
So I got it out, unzipped it, put on some clothes. I put a little deal on Maverick and I stuck him in the sleeping bag and I slid in there with him and I just zipped us all the way up.
Nice.
And, we made it through the night. But I mean, I was still, I was in a camper, and it was fine. Once I got in that thing
Yeah.
with him, we were good.
No
It was
problem.
like, we'll make it through. And then I went and got propane the next day. But 20-degree weather on a hike might be a little
Yeah,
different.
it's just relative to, where you're at and
Yeah.
how it feels, what gear you have, but I mean, that's what makes it fun though. That's why we do these
Oh,
things, because you
yeah,
get to
yeah.
talk about it and you're like, man, it sucked then, but it's fun to reminisce
Yeah.
on now.
Yeah. Anytime that I was in those type of environments, it was always fun for me because it was just me, my camper, and my dog. And it was like us versus whatever weather is coming.
Hmm.
It was always like that because Montana and Wyoming and, Nebraska, they experience, and even Kansas sometimes, the weather there is way different than it is here. Like
Yeah.
I know exactly what's going to happen in Texas. Like I know we're not going to have a winter.
Yeah.
We're going to have, we'll get into, it'll get a little cool in January, February, and it's going to warm right back up. So we don't experience like what the northern states do.
Yeah.
Especially you get up around like Billings, which is just kind of bordering Canada.
Uh-huh.
Man, those guys, wintertime, it's rough.
So how much time did you spend up there?
I was in that position for 10 years.
Uh-huh.
I've probably spent, I would say four collective years in those two states because it was an international line that ran from the U.S. into Canada, and so Canada actually was feeding us, and then we fed crude oil to everyone else.
So real cold.
Yeah, it's so when I hear people talk about like, oh, it's cold, I'm like, man, I remember driving one time and, like on the dash of my truck, it'll tell you the outside temperature. It was below 55. And I was headed to meet all of my guys at this like little diner that was still open. I'm like, how are these guys open? I mean, it's snow, ice. Now, the care that they have for the roads is way different. Like they know what's coming. They get you squared away to where you can at least travel on the roads.
Yeah.
But I remember pulling up to this diner and I opened my door and it was like it took my breath away. It was so cold. You could take like a glass of hot water and throw it in the air from like inside your camper and it would evaporate. It's gone.
Yeah.
And so going through, about 6 weeks of that was always fun. Everyone always had some sort of weird challenge and we would all kind of band together and like, heat tape and, it's like, how do we keep our plumbing going without cracking stuff in these cheap campers? It's not like we're well insulated. So, we helped, everybody kind of helped you because we couldn't work. I mean, you'd have, we'd go to do an integrity dig, right? And you'd have the first 3 or 4 foot would just be ice. It would just be solid. You're not getting through it. I mean, I had a 260 Traco. I mean, he would hammer down to try to like, break the dirt it wasn't happening. So it is fun experiencing it. While you're in it, kind of in the storm, it's not so much fun. But now looking back, kind of talking through it with you now, it's like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I wanted to follow up with wildlife.
Yeah,
So, what was the and you can kind of talk about your Arizona hike as well, but I know that you've encountered at least one bear.
hmm
Um, was that on one of these, or was that a different?
that was on the Grand Enchantment Trail,
Okay,
the
and
GET.
yeah,
Yeah.
how did you handle that situation?
Uh,
What kind of bear
pro-
was it? I guess
so
to
it
start
was a
with,
black bear,
black bear.
as
Okay,
far as I can tell. It was as soon as I saw it, it was probably around. It was within 100 yards, probably closer to 50 to 70. I don't know it quite
yeah,
like a hunter, but there was a tree line with a little hill, and I heard like a crash, snapping limbs. So I knew there was something big.
sure.
And then I just kind of froze and looked up, and then there's a bear, and it's already running away. Because,
Okay, yeah,
black bears, they're not like grizzlies. They could
yeah,
definitely kill a person, but usually
sure,
they're skittish,
yeah.
and scaredy. And this one was, but I've
And
never seen a
and
bear before, so it
are
freaked me out.
are black bears? And I know you'll know this. I probably should. This is elementary stuff. Do they typically eat meat, or are they more fruit berry type?
I think they're omnivores. They
Okay,
they might prefer berries. They
yeah,
might only eat berries. I don't really know.
yeah. I
Uh,
can't, but like I know grizzlies for sure is like the one that it's like you don't really want to.
yeah.
You want to avoid those guys as
I
much as
mean,
possible.
I wouldn't be hiking unarmed in grizzly
Sure.
country, but with
Yeah.
black bears, it's like, that one saw me. It started running in the opposite direction. My heart is beating through my chest, and then I was frozen for 10 seconds, and then I was like, this was where I was gonna put my campsite up, and it's almost dark. And so I like gave the biggest, like, I would describe it as a roar. If I could even produce something in that moment, it felt like that. But
Yeah, yeah,
whatever, I just like at the top of my lungs, I yelled as loud as I could, just like trying to make even more noise, just like,
yeah.
and then I set up my tent and got inside.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, some of this stuff, man, I got so many more questions here. Um, I feel like what other is there any other like long solo hikes that you've done after? Like,
Um,
how many have you completed or whatever?
So we talked about the two longest ones I did.
Okay,
I also did uh, the Grand Canyon rim to
that's
rim.
right. Yeah,
That's a great hike, and it's very accessible.
yeah.
It's only somewhere around 22 miles to go in one direction. We went over 5 days. We went uh, from the south rim to the north rim and then back to the south. So you go
Okay,
all the way down to the bottom and back up. The elevation change is crazy, but it's pretty accessible. I think if you're a strong hiker,
yeah.
there's
Yeah, because there's
decent
some
infrastructure.
valleys, and there's some.
Mhm.
I've been to the Grand Canyon. My experience there, I didn't hike anything, but I just had a moment where I was traveling. I was actually driving from New Jersey to San Diego.
Mhm.
So it was just across country, and I was like, well, I'm on a 7 day drive. Like,
That's a heck of a
yeah, it
drive.
took me 7.5 days. So
Yeah.
from, if anyone wonders, from like New York, New Jersey to San Francisco Bay Area, if you ever want to do that drive, it's about 7 days.
Wow.
Yeah,
So,
and I've done it twice. But there's like you can kind of stop off, and
yeah.
to get to the Grand Canyon, I think is like it's like an hour off path. You got to
Mhm.
drive back.
Yeah.
So I was like, it's an hour, might as well go check it out.
Yeah.
And I remember standing in front of it, kind of thinking like, okay, this is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I would, because I've seen everything. The most impressive thing were the redwoods. I think is the trees and the
Oh yeah.
man, it is insane. But I remember seeing like Mount Rushmore when I went there,
Oh,
and
cool.
I just wasn't impressed.
Because it was
It was
small,
so small.
but it's still
It
cool.
yes, it is cool, but like the Teutons, it's like
Yeah.
way better.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, for whatever reason, maybe the kid in me was thinking like it was going to be like this
Massive.
massive, like, and I was like, oh, well, yeah. But some of the conspiracy stuff behind it, it's kind of neat if you've ever dove off into that. They talk about like tunnels, in the
I mean,
backs of
I've
them, and
seen National Treasure.
well,
So
yeah, well,
I don't know how
pretty
it
pretty close.
aligns with that.
Yeah, it's probably pretty close to that. Uh, yeah, but I remember because I know you can do like helicopter tours, and it's
That's cool.
pretty. And then the famous story of the like the murderer that was in the. Remember, he was like, dude,
This is news to me.
oh man, he had like escaped into the Grand Canyon. He was gone for 7 days, and then he ended up hijacking someone and making it out.
Oh.
They were like hunting, and he was an experienced hiker. He was like he was very aware and capable of being in that environment.
Huh.
And so these law enforcement officers, they're not hikers, they're
Right.
not, and this guy was wearing them out.
And he got away.
And yeah, he put on like this blonde wig. I think they
Huh.
did catch him, but he made it difficult.
Wow.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but yeah, if you just look up, I'm sure you could look up Grand Canyon murderer or something, and it'll pop up.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked about. Oh, one thing that I wanted you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about your hike and the
Mhm.
rosary, but I know you're Catholic, and having these experiences and having that religious background, if you want to call it that,
Yeah.
spiritual, religious, whatever, however people frame that,
Mhm.
how does that impact your decision making? Like when you're kind of out doing these things, does
Yeah.
does your faith come into play? Like when you're in Africa,
Yeah.
and what's the religion out there? As far as like what do they practice, and was there any disconnect, or were you able to share your faith with them
Mhm.
openly, or like how did that all
Yeah.
lay that out for me?
So, since Zambia was a former British colony, um, they had a decent amount of Christian influence.
Really?
And what's really cool is at least the Zambian people that I spent time with, they integrated a lot of their cultural song and dance into Christian services. So there was kind of like a fusion of more traditional ways of expressing spirituality and community, but it was
Yeah.
very much in a Christian framework. Um, uh, there was a Catholic church in a close by village, definitely in the provincial capital. I went there a few times, and there were different denominations. Seventh Day Adventist was big. Let's see, the Evangelical Church in Zambia. There were just a lot of different Christian denominations, and
Yeah.
it was a cool thing. So I attended different churches. You know, I'm at the end of the day, I'm a Christian,
Right.
and
Yeah.
Catholicism is the way that I've been brought up. I think it's a certain perspective and a certain way of looking at Christianity. I love the sacraments and the tradition of the church, but ultimately for me, I think it's about Christ and his message. And whenever I make any big decision in my life, um, I try and think about, like, you know, am I doing the right thing? And, that's a thing we could get into really deep, but I
Yeah.
think my Catholic upbringing, my Christian beliefs, it's just kind of like the moral compass. Before I do anything, even if it's just like a self oriented kind of little goal, it's just like I need to make sure that I'm respectful to my parents, even though I'm doing something that is like maybe they're not as comfortable with.
Hmm.
I have to show them the utmost respect because they're accepting this maybe more risky, less traditional way of going about things and
Yeah.
exploring the world. And I need to try and figure out a way to help others or use these experiences to give back at some point, And it's like I feel like that's just something that kind of paints my decision making, and I don't always get it right. I think
Yeah.
my decision to join the Peace Corps, to be quite frank, was a selfish decision. No doubt I wanted to help people in Africa, but I was the one having a quarter life phase of discovery, maybe
Yeah.
crisis, certainly a crisis that led me to do the GET hike. And so that was a personal ambition. But I feel like you can take that, and with the existing religious or spiritual framework you have, you can say, I needed, or I felt like I needed something to help me personally, but like, how do I take that experience and share it with others? The way that it changed me as a person, like, how am I going to pay it forward?
Well, like, because you were talking about how things were a little bit slower in Africa, did
Mm-hmm.
that bring you closer? Do you think to you with your relationship with Christ? Did it? Do you think you had more time to kind of reflect on your religious background per se?
Oh,
And
I love this question because um, going in, I thought it surely would.
yeah,
And coming out, it showed me a lot of my own deficiencies as a person,
yeah,
where it showed me a lot of my imperfections. And I was able to just like accept it. But it was like, oh, I was like, I mean, to be quite honest, like going into that experience, like I had this idea of who I was, I'm like, I'm a good person. And then I'm put in a situation where it's like each day that you live, you can really be helping people. And there were a lot of things I did to help other people. And there were a lot of days that I kept to myself and did
hmm
my own thing. But it was good because it like reminded me, it was like, Blake, you're not perfect. Like
yeah,
you get, not that I ever thought,
sure, yeah,
but we have this internal dialogue of how we think. At least
yeah,
I think a Christian dialogue is like, how am I doing? Like, am I
sure,
living the
yeah,
Christian way? And I feel like I was like thinking that I was walking the path a little better. And then I got to Zambia and it was like, no, there's some people that really need help. And there are some people that are really living the walk of Christ. And it's like, Blake, you got some work to do, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah,
And so I feel like if nothing else, that experience helped me be more realistic and be okay with that. Cause like the thing I love about Christianity is it's not about perfection. It's just about working towards
yeah.
the kingdom, just trying to live like Christ.
Yeah, and I think we get lost. I'm a Christian as well, and I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds of, you know, the work based type
Mm-hmm.
religion where it's like I've got to have my goods got to outweigh my bad, then I'll be
Yeah.
accepted, and that's not really the framework that we see. Definitely not in the literature
Right.
that I read. Is very different. It's more like no, grace is given and it's new every day.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it wasn't, you would I would rain fire on you. Like, so I think that we kind of get in, but then I think a lot of people too will read a passage like, faith without works is dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so they may take that passage and go, okay, every day I've got to earn my place in
Yeah.
heaven. And it's just not exactly how that works. Now I do think that you definitely should be conscious of where you're at, because I have a heart for people. I love people, and I'm a bit of an introvert, honestly. Like a lot of people see me and they're like, oh, he's outgoing, he's easy to talk to, but I had to work on that. I mean, I
Yeah.
had to really be vulnerable. Like even in this conversation, is sometimes can be difficult for me to talk about, a specific area of my life. Even though for the viewer, it may seem like it's very easy and it rolls off easily, but
Yeah.
it's something that I have to work on. So, um, I always thought like, man, if I was remote, um, would that bring me a different perspective with the king? Would I be closer? Would I be and I kind of put myself in those positions where it's like, okay, well, if I was somewhere where I wasn't around anyone and it was just me in a house with no internet, no nothing, it just with my own thoughts for a week,
Yeah.
what would that look like? I think I'd probably experience what you did, where it was like, you know, I don't know. I don't know if it would bring me closer or further away.
Yeah.
Definitely not further away, because I think getting rid of the distractions
Yeah.
of our, I mean, I can go through, I think I've told this story before where I was trying to get my primary doctor to give me Adderall. I was like, I think I've been told I have ADD. I don't know. I need something to focus. He's like, I'm not doing that. He's like, focus can be learned. And I'm like, it's the first time anyone's ever told me that.
Yeah.
He's like, go light a candle and stare at it for 3 minutes every morning. I was like, all right.
Really?
Yeah. So I lit a candle and I would stare at this thing for 3 minutes. Blake, I can tell you, it feels like time's in reverse. Like for me to sit for 3 minutes and look at this flame and just kind of try to clear your mind. Clearing your mind is the hardest thing ever.
Yeah.
There's so much junk and just useless stuff that it's like you're constantly distracted. But over time, I did it for about 10 days. About the 5th or 6th day, I think I was able to really hone in, and the 3 minutes didn't feel like, an hour.
Yeah.
It was going by quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to like really experience like, okay, I can focus on a task if I just sit down and tell my mind, this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Like if you can get into that mindset of like, I'm going to focus on this, I'm going to do this until it's done. It can be done.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot of the prescriptions that were given probably may be unnecessary, especially for children. I think that, like my son is 2. He's a little hyper. He runs around and does all kinds of stuff. Like that doesn't mean I need to put him on medication.
Right.
So I kind of can understand or relate a little bit to that experience. And so with like I guess you being in that environment and it kind of being, it sounds like there's a lot of Christianity in that area. Mm-hmm. Do you think that the villagers or the people that live there, do you think the reliance on Christ is more than where we're at in America? Because I think here, me having access to so much so easily kind of sometimes makes me not really rely on God to come through, as to where you're in an area where like, hey, they need rain, they need, medicine, or do you think that they're more reliant on Christ to show up for them than we are here in the States?
You gotta be careful. I'll get going. And, I could talk about this a lot. I do think that there's a distinction between rural lifestyles and urban lifestyles.
Yeah.
And there are good things on both sides. I'm not trying to marginalize one or the other, but specifically with the Zambian rural lifestyle, it's community oriented and you have less technology and less governing structures to allow you that security.
All right, so the question that I posed, and we're having some technical difficulties. Sorry, guys. The reliance on Christ. Do you think it's more prominent in, let's say, a place like Africa versus the United States, where everything is accessible here? So one of the things that I was saying was like, I can get anything I want. I can drive. I mean, we're 10 minutes from a hospital. I'm 2 minutes from food. I've got a reliable vehicle. It's easy for me to get from point A to point B. I don't have to walk. So I think some of that, along with distractions, can make me not as reliant on Christ as I probably should be, because I feel like I'm living pretty comfortably. So I think it can steal from like our prayer life. I think
Yeah.
which I already know, like social media and all that stuff. If I can keep you distracted, you're really not a threat, right? So like if I can keep you off course, then I'm not really worried about you as to where like if someone gets sick, I feel like maybe they really need the Lord to show up
Oh yeah.
and help them.
Yeah.
So do you think do you see that, or I mean, you've been both places. How do you feel?
I do. And I don't think, I think the community that I lived in, it was very poor, but, people grew their own food and there was a certain amount of stability. Now, granted, way less resources than anything we can understand
Yeah,
as Americans, but, there's a certain community fabric. And I think some people are more religious than others, even though it's a predominantly Christian culture. Some people they really believe it in their bones, and some people, you know, take to drinking alcohol, or they don't really want to confront, you know, life because it's so incredibly hard sometimes. But I think the difference is like, I mean, the people that you know or that I know that are like yeah, the most on fire for their faith. I'm trying to word that
yeah,
correctly. I mean, it's not like anybody's better than anybody else, but
sure,
some people really embody the faith.
yeah,
And I think it boils from my perspective, it boils down to trust. The Christian ethos, like you were just talking about, like the works, they're just evidence of your faith. You're not earning it.
sure, yeah,
But the faith, I think it's a gauge of how much do you trust God? How much does your security lie in God's hands versus the world?
mm,
Because the world will fail you, but
yeah.
God will not.
That's
Your
well said.
creator won't. He'll give you trials, but you'll overcome them. I think the difference that we see is it's so much easier in a wealthy society to draw your security from the world, from your assets, from things that are under your control. Because at the end of the day, it's, are you choosing yourself or are you choosing God?
Hmm.
Are you choosing worldly things that you have control over, or I mean, uh, if you're further on in your journey and you're on fire for faith, then you really have that trust in God, regardless of your
Yeah,
financial situation. But um, it's not a great thing. We don't. I hated to see people that didn't have the means to take care of certain things, and we hate to see that anywhere.
right.
But it's like, but if there's any silver lining, it's that if that person is religious, like they devote their trust to God. And that's why, in my opinion, the Bible talks about it talks about riches in not a purely negative light, but it says that riches can be an obstacle.
Right,
Like the camel passing through the eye of a needle.
right.
There's nothing inherently wrong with riches, but it can be very alluring to have faith in all the grain that you've stored up in your storehouse,
Yeah,
and there could be a fire that takes it all out. But if your trust and your faith is rooted in God, you know,
yeah,
then you have that foundation. And I would say it's more prevalent, generally speaking, in a place like Zambia, but they're people, and
yeah,
there's so much variation with people's level of faith,
yeah.
even in a situation like that.
Did you encounter anyone there that was specifically struggling in that area? Were you able to help them with that, or was it just more you were just trying to build authentic relationships?
Yeah. So I was a public servant for ultimately
The government.
the government, but
Yeah.
for that community. So, I had a few conversations that were like with a couple of my good friends. We would like compare and contrast beliefs,
Mm.
and different practices within Christianity. But I wasn't trying to proselytize or anything like that. I
Yeah.
wasn't trying to like really approach problems from the example, or from like talking about or converting or anything that would be controversial on a certain level in terms of Christianity. I felt like that wasn't my role. My
Yeah.
role was just to show people a good example as an American on behalf of the American government,
Yeah.
foster friendships, and definitely embody the principles of Christ as much as I could. But I wasn't there for a religious mission.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like, I guess it's not like you know, Mark Driscoll going to Haiti, right? Where his goal is to, which I don't think he did well on that one. But I get the sentiment of like, you're there for a purpose. You're there for like, you're trying to help them cultivate another source of, economic revenue, or, being able to help them like, hey, this will make you more prosperous, as well as bring you sustainable food. And
Right.
so yeah, I get that. This is a question that I think probably if anyone is considering this, what advice would you give someone who wants to embark on a path of service, exploration, or an intellectual pursuit of going to, another country, whether it be for the Peace Corps or just a personal trip? What
Yeah.
advice would you give them if they were trying to embark on this journey?
Oh, yeah. I would say follow your curiosity.
That's good.
Whatever it is that's inside you, that if you really think about it, or if you really feel it out, depending upon how you process the world, what is it that you're curious about? It wouldn't matter if somebody paid you money or not.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to. We're not talking about figuring out your life. We're not talking about what you're going to do for so many years. What do you want to do today? Or what would you want to do and like explore? Like, what brings up feelings of excitement in you? And
Yeah.
then it's like, and don't just immediately just up and do that thing. Don't
Sure.
just impractically follow your passion, but like use thought and use planning to responsibly create some type of little adventure to try out or to interface with the curiosity. And
Yeah.
that might just be, it might be reading, it might be going on a short hike. You might have the time in your schedule where you could go on a long hike, whatever it may be. And you might like do the thing that you're curious about and not like it. And that's fine because you get to know yourself better.
Yeah.
But, the world's going to try and tell you what you should do. You should listen to that, at least to the people that you trust.
Sure. Yeah.
Your family, if you have a good relationship and you believe what they say, but, use it as information. Ultimately, you make the decisions in your life. So follow your moral compass and follow your curiosity. And
Yeah.
at least in my life, I've found that I don't always get it right. When I screw up, it just helps me learn about myself.
Yeah.
So,
I think those are like some of the biggest lessons, though, is like the mistakes. Because I've noticed I'm not really learning when I'm killing it.
Yeah.
When everything's going
Yeah.
great, it's when I make the mistake and I'm like, oh, okay, I
Yeah.
can't do that,
right.
or at least I can't do it again. Like, we got to figure this out.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good. So, we'll close out here, but I think there's going to be a part 2 to this, just because there's still so much I want to get into with you. But I guess we'll close with like, what's next for you? Like, do you have any new projects or travel plans or goals? Like, what's on the horizon for Blake?
I mean, I've got thoughts. One thing that I really want to do, since we've talked so much about hiking,
Yeah.
I want to do an extended float trip. That's my next
Okay. Explain
curiosity.
that. Explain
So,
that.
I mean, if you like kayaking or canoeing, most
Yeah.
people have probably done a day or two on the water. I'd really like to do something that's like, 80 plus miles, 5 to 7 days. And now that I'm living in Arkansas, I'm considering the Buffalo.
Yeah.
And now it's on a recording, so maybe that'll hold me accountable.
Yeah, there you
My
go.
idea was, not this spring, which is the season people typically float, but maybe the next spring, so I'm not rushed and I can kind of slowly plan. But I just love the idea of like starting upriver and going all the way to the confluence of a larger river and just camping each night
Yeah.
right outside of the floodplain.
And this would be this like another solo thing, right?
Honestly,
or would you?
As I get older, the solo trip is less appealing. And I don't know myself perfectly, but I've dealt with enough headspace in those environments that now I'm starting to really enjoy the times when you're with another person. It's less introspective, but it's a really great bonding experience. So I would love to do this trip with another person, or maybe a whole group.
Yeah. Finding a group of people that can take a week off or might be difficult.
That would want to do that.
Yeah, like, hey, do you want to go on an 80-mile?
Yeah. It's a hard sell. But.
You're pretty persuasive. You might be able to get it done. So where can, like, if people, they're going to see this podcast online, like, hey man, that guy's interesting. I'm guessing you got Facebook, you got Instagram, like, what do you got going on? Or do you use any of those tools?
I'm not a big social media guy. I mean, I use Facebook for Marketplace. I have an Instagram. I've posted 2 times in like 8 years or something. I actually have 2 Instagram pages. I have one with some of my art. But it's not related to this conversation at all.
But still, it's part of you.
Well, if you're interested in that, it's called Hue Like Jazz. Very weird, kind of abstract drawings for the most part. Hue, like the different colors.
But I've seen some. I've seen some of the work. It's actually pretty incredible. It reminds me of like, have you seen some of Jim Carrey's stuff?
No.
Jim Carrey, man,
he's an artist.
He's a painter.
Really?
And dude, some of the stuff that he does is just insane.
Wow.
And he's just recently converted Christian. And he's going around to like facilities where people have addictions, and he's speaking to them about Christ.
That's cool.
Is that not crazy?
Yeah.
Like, he was one of my some of his movies got me through some of the darkest times of my childhood. I usually start the podcast by saying Bumblebee Tuna.
What's that from?
So that's from Ace Ventura 2, where he's in a African village, and that's a greeting that they use. And the line that he uses is he walks up to one of the tribesmen who's sitting down, and he's like, "Excuse me, sir, but your balls are showing." And then he's like, "Bumblebee Tuna," and he walks away. It's just like one of the most classic lines in that movie. But
is that the one with the raccoon at the very beginning?
No, he's got so the first one is about he's a dog or a dolphin.
Right.
That he's trying. The second one is a bat.
What? Well, no. In the very first scene when he's climbing on a mountain.
That's it. Yeah, with the raccoon.
My gosh.
Yeah, where it's kind of a spin on the Highlander, that other movie with Sylvester Stallone.
Okay.
It's like a spin off of that first scene. Yeah. So anyway, well, man, dude, this has been a blast.
It's been a great combo.
I wish my technology worked a little bit. I need to work through some kinks on this, but we got all the audio. We got a lot of stuff, so we'll edit it down. But thank you so much for taking the time to be here on the show. And this is like a startup, so you're my first interview. Like, you're my first, so it'll be special for me if this thing ever takes off, it'll be cool to come back. But we definitely need to do a part 2, because there's you've done there's so much stuff that we can get into, faith and trips and just all kinds of stuff that I didn't even get to, just kind of for time's sake, because we've been shooting for a little over an hour. So it's been great.
I'm happy to talk again. I appreciate you having me on, Caleb.
Yeah,
it's been a great time.
So we're signing off. So thank you guys. This is the True Podcast. This is Blake, and we'll catch you on the next one.